I guide my clients to start to visualize their position in the world. And it's a concentric ring. So imagine a bullseye. And at the center of it, that's your sacred space. And I invite everyone to start their story work, their self-inquiry, their understanding their self-concept in that sacred space. You, your past self, your future self, and depending on what spiritual belief systems you hold, it could be loved ones that have passed on, God, spirit, universe, whoever you commune with in that type of sacredness. That's the first circle. And then the next one out from that is your inner circles, your most trusted, closest, most intimate relationships. And that may only be 2 or 3 or 1 sometimes, and it can ebb and flow at different times of our life. But that inner circle really represents people who have entered into a deeply reciprocal, trusting relationship with you. And then the circle beyond that is communities. And this starts to feel a little bit more dynamic and nebulous. We have different forms of community. We have different intimacy levels in the communities that we're in. It could be geographically situated, centered around a common interest. But the key with community is that cooperation around a common goal. And then beyond that, we get into the circles of audience or loyal audience. So they may know you through what you share better than you know them. There can be some of this parasocial interaction happening there. Beyond that, the general public, which might be someone who hasn't heard of your name or seen you before and is just interacting with something of yours, a part of your work, or that's their first impression. So if you imagine these concentric circles, now you start to have a lot of opportunities for intentional agency, intentional choice making about how do I want to share myself to each of these stratuses of people that I'm connected to? How do I design the experience for them and for me?
Dr. Joey, when was the first time you realized that you were living in someone else's story?
A distinct moment isn't coming up, but I would say it wasn't until adulthood, because when I think back as a child, I was very much in my own world and aware of my stories. So somebody else's story. Well, actually, when you say it that way, I loved having my mom tell stories to us. That was one of the fonder memories I had in my relationship with my mother as a young child. I think I got the best version of her when she was telling stories. Now, the stories that were the ones I loved to hear from her were when she was a child, because if she told stories in which I was also a character in them, not the best stories. So I don't know how aware I was that I was I think that it probably took me being an adult looking back and being like, okay, that was her experience of becoming a mom and things, that was her experience of you as her child.
Can you give me an example of what you
Yeah.
mean?
I don't think that my mother, like her greatest dream in life was to be a translator in the UN. It wasn't to be a stay-at-home homeschool mom of 3 kids, 14 months apart. She ended up having twins, and then one, my younger sister, was born 14 months later. So, and she had married my father, who is a Hakka man. We have a very traditional culture. And she was sort of baptized by fire, marrying into the family, and finding out what our customs were for her as a daughter-in-law. And that includes, sort of being responsible for the home, cooking, things like that. Now, my mother was given grace because she was a Westerner. And she was very good at making money by teaching English. So my grandparents, said, well, continue doing that. You're better at that. So she wasn't actually confined to the house and doing these sort of domestic roles. But many of the stories that she would tell me as I was growing up had sort of this like grumbling nature to them about becoming a mom and the things that she had to give up in being a mom. And she wasn't living her sort of glamorous jet set life as a interpreter for the UN or, on special missions to different countries around the world.
Mm. So when you say stories, just kind of the narratives that you picked up through growing up, rather than literally almost like bedtime stories.
She would tell her childhood stories like bedtime stories, and she is a great storyteller. And she sort of, there was a blend between fact and fiction. Come to find out, many of the stories she would tell us were not always on the factual side, but she she would tell these stories, these great adventure stories of her life, and it kind of gave us insight. And I can look back now as an adult and see um, that's her experience. The best times of her life were when she was the hero, and as a child, I got to appreciate that with just sort of like full unconditional love and wonder and appreciation for this person who could narrate her life in such a dynamic way.
How did that make you feel? Because my instinct on hearing that is maybe that her mind was elsewhere. So, but you kind of you delivered that with or like almost like like with a lot of gratitude.
Mm,
But my sense would be like, how did that child feel?
mm. No, the child version of me, I delivered the child version of my experience. Yeah. So it is interesting growing up as one of three children. And I think that when you grow up with parents who struggle with different mental illnesses or different shortcomings, no parent is perfect, but I think that children who have to overcompensate a bit for some of their parents' shortcomings can have wildly different experiences. And so my experience was really different from my siblings. Um, my siblings may have experienced more grief and rage as we were going through childhood, and my coping mechanism was to lean into gratitude and to lean into wonder and um, almost like when we talk about those stories that my mom told, I started off by saying I accessed the best version of her as she was telling those stories. And it was like she saw her life through this lens of wonder and adventure. And that lens represented safety as well. So for me as a young child, I picked that up as whether a coping mechanism or a tool to navigate my very complex life at home.
Mm. And I suppose what I'm trying to get into is when we talk about reclaiming your story and the work that you do with your
Mm.
clients, what is the pain that you went through that you share with your clients?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Part of, well, I'll say this. It's not so much that I share my pain with my clients. I'm actually very careful to, and this preceded my work as a coach, a story coach, but even when I was in the classroom and when I was a spoken word coach with high school students, and when I was on my own healing journey, I learned very early that pain is an opportunity to be processed, to be healed, to be alchemized into something else. And that while it can be a source for us to create art from, right? Um, the most sustainable art and the most impactful art comes where you tell the truth of the pain, or you're able to capture the grief, but when you are sharing it with the audience, you're doing it from a place of healing, of wholeness, of having made sense of some of that, rather than scratching that wound completely raw and requiring the audience really to care or give some form of triage for this completely unhealed wound. Um, so I had experience first channeling my harder experiences in life, my pain, my grief, having channeled them into art, first for myself, I always teach my clients and my students to be their own first and best audience, right? And poetry was really an outlet for that. Narrative research and story writing was an outlet for that too. And so then what I am sharing with others is not the raw pain that I need care. I've already given myself that, or I've sought out care from professionals or individuals close to me that can be trusted. But what I'm sharing then with my audience is my art, right? My lessons, my wisdom, the becoming, right? I get to become somebody as I go through that process of seeing these are my life experiences. These were some of the cards that were dealt to me, but this is how I moved through it. This is how I made sense of it. These were the choices I made along the way. These are the areas I didn't have choice, but this is where I did get really resourceful and exercise my agency and choose to write myself into a different storyline.
What about those cards that you were dealt? Could you speak more on that?
Well, I can speak to it a little bit personally. I'm pausing here because there's when we talk about cards being dealt, there's sort of these categories of that are very common in the human experience, where trauma and oppression are very shared experiences, right? So for many of us who have more sensitive stories, this could be intersections of race, discrimination, systemic trauma, or interpersonal trauma. And I've experienced some form of all of that, and I also pause here because rather than kind of getting into every detail, some of that I keep sacred, I don't share all of that. But I've had to heal from trauma from early childhood all the way through adulthood. I've had to heal from assault to my body. I am a neurodivergent human that had to navigate a world that wasn't made for us. I have navigated microaggressions moving here at a young age as a biracial child, seeing straight up racism enacted on my dark-skinned father, but also experiencing microaggressions towards me and my siblings growing up in the US. And then just a lot of complex, childhood trauma that comes with growing up as a daughter of a parent with mental illness. And then later in life, housing insecurity, economic instability, also leading to some of those hardships.
If you're anything like me, you're probably good at starting habits, but fail to stick to them over the long term. There's probably one or two, whether that be going to the gym or taking the dog for a walk, but struggle to maintain others around career, relationship, or life goals. If you're a long-term listener of the podcast, this won't be the first time you've heard me talk about habits and leveraging public accountability. That's why I created Indiip, the tool that helps you build healthy habits and stick to them. After creating your free account, you'll be given your own personal public profile link, which you can share with your friends, your family, coach, or followers. And when someone clicks that link, you'll be given a real-time notification that someone is watching your habits. I can't tell you how much of a motivator it is when you're stuck in a procrastination cycle and this little eyeball pops up with a number next to it. My productivity has gone through the roof since I started using it. It's that effective. Luckily for you, I'm giving away 100 free VIP months to my podcast listeners. There's no credit card required. Head to indiip.com/podcast. That's deep with two I's, indiip.com/podcast, or follow the links in the episode description below. Let's start crushing our habits today. I think our first ever conversation was centered around oversharing.
Oh, yeah.
And something that I was kind of not struggling with, but just trying to figure out as I started the podcast journey.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was just like, here we go. Here's everything, here's all my trauma. Yeah. And I think that has developed over time where I wonder whether in a weird way, like my willingness to be authentic might have become a little bit of a coping mechanism to like rely on too much. Like on like I was like I'm the authentic guy, do you know what I mean? So I need to tell everyone everything.
Maintain
And
the identity.
yeah, and feeling that anything short of absolute transparency is somehow misleading, underhand, or whatever to the people that listen. But certainly my perspective on that has definitely matured. Like as I'm sort of moving through this, and I often think I'm a very slow learner anyways. Like you'll say something, it'll land like 10 seconds later, or a concept will be delivered to me and it'll land like 12 hours later, or something like this might take 3 years or 10 years to actually really take seed.
I just wanted to affirm your experience with this, and it's quite common. I think your reaction is a response to a lot of dominant spaces. We experience things that feel like manipulation or inauthenticity, right? And so without guidance or without different paradigms to root into, our natural instinct is, well, if I want to be more helpful, if I want to be more truthful, then I just have to be completely transparent. So your experience is very common. And this gets into the decolonizing bit a little, because I learned this when I was spending time with Indigenous communities and Indigenous teachers, where gatekeeping in those communities is not seen as a bad thing. It's seen as a necessary protocol to protect their cultures, their peoples, and their sacred knowledge. So sacred knowledge is a very common term within Indigenous paradigms. And this notion that not everything is meant for everyone, especially not at every moment, right? That there's discernment required, not just for you as the speaker. It's not just about self-protection. It's about really service and giving, right? Not everybody is meant to receive everything. Our wisdom, our stories, who we are, the layers of intimacy that we give folks access to, these are all gifts, and they can't be really treasured as gifts if it's not, if we don't hold something sacred, right? And if we're not intentional about how we're sharing. So one of the pieces of advice that I often give my students and clients is, sometimes you will have healed from something. I often advise that you keep your rawest and your most unhealed stories within your sacred space or your inner circles until you're ready, until you've alchemized it into art, until you have expanded your capacity and your nervous system to channel that in a way that's not re-traumatizing yourself. But then beyond that, you can get to a point of healing where, like, there's certain stories, I have deep traumas and I feel quite healed from them. And my reason around not sharing them is simply because keeping them sacred allows me to access more power. It reminds me that I am not a commodity that has to be parceled out for everybody. It keeps me in more intimate connection with that sacred space, which is a very spiritual space for me. And it's where I access my deepest power.
Mm. So if we gave an example, let's say, easy one that comes to mind for me and as it relates to me is alcohol. I mean, actually, we've both got this thing, right?
Yeah.
This thing. Thank you for this thing. Whatever you want to call it, negative relationship with alcohol, probably a good term for it. And it's like that can form. If we look at this, if we think about the circle, the concentric circles, it's like are we saying like the struggles with alcohol in the past might sit on that third or fourth layer, but the deepest, darkest, worst time or whatever, most roughest time doesn't necessarily have to be on that outside circle. That can stay in the center.
Or I mean, I could keep stories sacred that aren't even traumatic stories. They're beautiful stories, and they're not meant for anybody else. That's how I nourish myself and my relationship with spirit and my ancestors. And I remind myself, I every time I do share, it's an act of generosity. And the contrast of that is that I keep things for myself, or I keep things for my ancestors, my descendants, people that are not of this realm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and we've spoken a little bit about this as well, and it's that I think it's easy for like me as a single man living on his own to like just doing this podcast thing, just like, hey, here, like here's all this stuff. But it's like this would be totally different if I had a wife, children, probably. And it's like, what is the impact of you sharing that stuff on the rest of your family or community, wider community?
Yeah, it can be. That's a big consideration, especially with the people I work with. And I understand this deeply. You know, I shared a little bit with my mom, and that's taken years for me to even get to a point where I claim that, you know, and I don't go into lots of detail. I'm very mindful of what I say about my family members because I am still in the process of writing a story where I hope it ends with deeper healing. And when that's my focus, airing out other people's stories, whether it's my truth or not, doesn't always lend itself to that objective, right? So this isn't always, though, about protecting yourself or others. Some of this too is we are moving ourselves into a paradigm where we, you know, I think you mentioned something where it's like me as single, and I thought about how much of our connection, or how much of our interaction and our sharing is because of a desire for connection, right? How much of it, if we take it a step further, is for validation, right? We desire to be seen, we desire to be understood, we desire to be validated. And so some of the practices that I'm naming beyond protection, actually, we move into this paradigm where you're making your choices not defensively, but you're making your choices artistically and spiritually and intentionally. And it's from a deeply rooted place where you don't need anything from anyone. So every choice that you're making gets to be the way an artist would make it. I don't know. I can't explain it any
Yeah,
other better way. I don't know.
yeah,
Are you with me?
yeah. And an offshoot of that makes me think about, I said earlier that perhaps I'm somewhat slightly less open in my conversations than I was early days, maybe. Or maybe I'm just thinking, oh, my audience knows this, so I'm not going to tap into it. And I often think, so when I first started the podcast, I gained like quite a nice little group of close connections that I'd met through the podcast,
Mm,
yourself included,
mm,
who turned into like beautiful friendships. And of the last, I don't know, off the top of my head, like 50 episodes or something, like maybe that's not been the case. And I'm like, what? Where are all the Joeys at? You know,
mm.
like, and then I just like considered, then I'm like, oh, I wonder whether, because as a tool to bond with someone, trauma bonding
Mm.
is like a really, I suppose probably at some point I learned that by giving something of me, as a
Mm-hmm.
gift is like a quick way to bond with someone, because when we had our conversation, had I not opened up about Z,
Yeah.
then maybe we wouldn't have the connection that we do now. I don't know.
No, actually, you're making a great point, and thank you, because I think this is an important point to clarify. One of the reasons that I believe so strongly in story work is because of its power to connect, right, and to humanize us and for us to see each other. So we are shifting a little bit, and it may sound kind of contradictory. It is one of the most powerful ways to build community, one of the most powerful ways to dismantle oppression and biases, right? So a lot of the work that I did in the classroom and why we brought stories in was because we have these internal biases that we carry that have been conditioned into us, whether from our families of origin or religions or education systems. And the result of that can often be flattening or dehumanizing other people before we really get to know them. So story is like unparalleled medium to share your humanity and receive from somebody else's humanity. And I think that's what storytelling is in its most pure, its purest and most unadulterated form, right? And I think some of the practices I was speaking about earlier in terms of keeping things sacred is contextual, right? It's because now we exist in these paradigms where community has been under attack, especially communities of Indigenous collective people, people of the global majority, who, if you look at those cultures, have the richest storytelling traditions and practices and customs. And what's happened in dominant culture is that storytelling has been sort of subsumed for capitalism. And that's why I talk so much about like resisting the commodification of myself through stories, right? And so part of my history is that I came into stories and thinking so nuanced and deeply about stories quite young, because coming from a family where we didn't have as much social capital, economic capital, going into college, I really applied for as many scholarships as I could, and I wrote many scholarships. And one thing that I did, though, I refused to sort of write a sob story. Like I told the truth, but I resisted flattening myself into the most like sort of horrific elements of my life story. And that required me to become very masterful and artful at telling my story on my terms. And I won many scholarships. And scholarships, I won them in ways that I could stand by. I didn't feel like I had to live up to this like sad kid that I'd painted out that they'd thrown money at to give a chance. You know, I felt like I was representing myself truthfully. And so I figured that out. But when I soon became a tutor and mentor for other people writing their scholarships or their college applications, and I noticed that that was not sort of the dominant, practice in that field. It was like find the saddest. It was sort of like trauma porn, and I saw it again when I got into the spoken word poetry world, that the practice was, I will give you my most shocking life experience in exchange for scholarship money, a chance at this job, points in this slam poetry competition. And it became this transactional commodification, which is the opposite of story as a medium, as a channel for our truest humanity to be shared with one another, right? And so this is, I hope you understand, like, and take this in a nuanced way. I'm not saying that everyone did it and everyone was like on this end of the spectrum of completely pimping their stories out. There are also so many masterful orators and writers and storytellers who have been cracking away at this craft of how do I infuse my humanity, my truest, fullest humanity through language, right? And those are the people that have really impacted me and been a North Star to me along the way. So it's not everybody for sure, but I think there's so much in dominant culture that is asking for way too much from us. And my work comes in as a little bit of an intervention to that.
I'd really like to just pick apart and define this term, decolonize your story, if you wouldn't mind just breaking that apart for us and explain in detail what that actually means.
Yeah, I've mentioned it sort of indirectly in this conversation a little bit. So when I talk about like dominant paradigms or dominant systems, we're really talking about the systems of power that exist largely through imperialism and colonization, right? Which, yes, several countries in the world, nations in the world participated in imperialism, but in general, it was European countries that had this imperial agenda to go and dominate the entire world. And when they would arrive in a place that was not theirs, they would systematically break down the language, the culture, and the belief systems, in addition to, in some places, the most extreme was, killing and stealing humans and turning them into slave labor or what have you, stealing their land from them, right? So very, very violent history that all of modern society today is impacted by, regardless of what culture, what lineage you're from, right? Whether you are descended from more of a European colonizer's background or you're a person of the global majority. And not every culture in the global majority has been colonized, nor have they been colonized by Europe. But the modern dominant culture that is present primarily through dominant media channels, the internet, entertainment, uphold white supremacy, right? That's why English is the dominant language. That's why Christianity is the dominant culture. That's why cis heterosexuality is the dominant sexuality. These things are the norms to which everything else is deviant. So when we talk about story and telling your personal story as a means to communicate your truth, your lived experiences, and your identity, if your identity doesn't fit into that dominant culture, trying to speak your story is risky, is painful, space is not made for it. And largely, you've grown up in a situation where the rich story traditions that you were born into have already been fractured, right? They haven't been passed down in the way that they would have been had colonization not come into play. So decolonizing story work is a work of, first, we acknowledge the context that we're working in. We acknowledge the powers that are creating the situations that we're up against. And then we are equipping every single person to go back into their own origin stories, their cultures, their histories, some of which requires a process of grieving because you start to realize how much has been lost and not handed down or obscured from you, kept from you. And then you start to see how by being disconnected from your places, your people, your languages, your communities, how that has snowballed into many effects in your life, such as lacking connection, lacking whole relationships, right? There's so much dysfunction in our relationships. There's so much mental illness. There's so much tragedy and trauma that has come as a result of colonization and the breaking down of collective communities. So decolonizing your story isn't just about telling one story. It's about restoring your whole humanity.
Is decolonizing your story only for those with heritage in the colonized parts of the world?
Well, let me ask you this question. Do you feel like your connection to your oral traditions, your ancestors' belief systems, your relationship with the land of your ancestors' origins, the way that your ancestors prayed, the way that they loved. Do you feel like that has all been passed down to you as much as it could be?
No. Strong no. Because I think, and this is interesting because, again, we did speak about this in the first chat, but it's like, as a somewhat of a consequence, a bounce back of that European colonization, or perhaps more like American English, whatever, like in more recent times, where it seems like we're seeing the kind of reverse happening in the countries like mine. There is this huge, I don't know if you've seen, but there is like a huge movement at the moment where a lot of the country feel that the indigenous traditions of a Christian nation are being eroded. So there is a very uncomfortable conversation around that as it relates to immigration and stuff, and it is very complex. It's not straightforward. So I wondered, that's the kind of lens that I'm thinking about this through, but I don't know if those stories are being eroded because of whatever mass migration, or I don't know whether it's just down to the modern world in general.
Well, I'll invite you into thinking about this. You mentioned that the context of your country, and you're referring to the UK to be specific, right?
Yeah.
Is this conversation that the indigenous Christian culture is being eroded. But if we really did our decolonizing story work, we'd probably start to tell a story where Christianity is not indigenous to your lands. Christianity was born in the Middle East. And actually, your lands gave birth to other belief systems long before Christianity. And if those people who are so up in arms about what feels like it's threatening the Christian religion actually spend some time restoring their relationship and their knowledge and their intimacy with your actual indigenous ways of knowing, being, believing, I think a lot of the arguments that people are having would start to dissipate very naturally.
It raises an interesting point on like, where does indigenous even begin?
Well, that's defined. So indigenous is considered to be the first people who stewarded that place. So of course, there's lots of migration in human history, but indigenous people, they were the first ones to call a place home and take care of it and be in relationship with that land. So they didn't have to move out anybody else. They didn't move in when somebody else was already there. There was the land, then there was the first people of that land, right? And they stayed and they were in deep relationship with that land, stewarding it and teaching their future generations how to continue caring for that land. And the land really shapes so much of the language, the belief systems. That's why you see vastly different rituals and practices for indigenous groups in the Arctic versus somebody that calls the equator their ancestral home. So that definition is defined.
Yeah, and there are like there's some similarities like the US and the UK, but then obviously I think it's much more obvious in the US where local cultures were displaced because of the Mayflower
Mhm.
in 1620 whatever it was. So yeah, I don't know. It like blows my mind. Like trying, like it's almost like when you start to think about. I got obsessed with Ancestry of late,
Mhm.
and like when you go like back and back and back and back and back and back and back, and what you realize is that every time you go back one generation, your grandparents multiply.
It becomes a really feathery sort of.
Yeah, because I'm like, well, I can go like 16 generations down to find someone in the 1500s, which is my 16th great grandmother in Scotland. But like that doesn't necessarily. But then I've also got 16 others.
Right?
So then like trying to like figure out your lineage is like, huh, you know?
Yeah, I totally get you, and I want to take this moment to shout out my maternal grandfather. So he's actually on my white side. So I'm biracial. My father is Hakka, and my mom is of Irish British descent. And my grandfather is a genealogist, or was. He's no longer practicing, but he did this, and I really appreciate that as one of the few white men in my life growing up. He did this very nuanced, tedious, difficult work of helping people come into better knowing of their lineage, right, of their stories. And I think it is deeply needed within descendants of European colonizing cultures, because I think that when you start to understand your lineage more specifically, you're inevitably what you're doing is you're breaking apart the myth of whiteness. Does that make sense? Right?
Sure.
People who benefit from white supremacy benefit from the generality of it, benefit from the non-specificity of it, benefit from well, we don't have a culture, we've just melted into this. Yeah, so that you can all get your benefits from the dominant system, right? But when you start to tell truer stories about your ancestors and where you came from, now you're Irish or Irish and British, you're this, you're that, and you start to see at a much more grassroots level, right? Um, and just doing that deep work breaks down these structures of power that require us to not think so deeply, who am I connected to? Who am I in relationship with? Where am I from? Who am I? Because if you know yourself that deeply, it requires you to see other people that deeply too. So things like racism and sexism and xenophobia and ageism and classism and transphobia, all these things lose power. The more that we humanize ourselves, the more that we humanize everybody else.
What are some other practices that one can use, tools, methods that you would teach for sort of reclaiming their story?
Yeah, I have quite a sequenced framework because the first thing is that we go into our memories and we unearth our story matter. And for many of us, this involves exploring around areas of trauma. So I definitely teach around doing safe memory work. Um, and I'm specific in referencing that whatever we do unearth, our lived experiences, our memories, that story matter. We remove the pressure to call it stories because a lot of times people were doing their work kind of like, I'm not sure if there's a story in there. No, there's not meant to be while we're just recalling the memories, right? But having the memories, it's almost like dumping out a jigsaw puzzle. You have to put the pieces on the table and flip them over. And then the next thing you do is you start to group them by color or find the border pieces so that you can put the picture together. So a lot of the story work is like that. After we sort of just accessed and unearthed story matter, our memories, our lived experiences, then we do our sense making work, where we start to go in and ask guiding questions, probing questions. What was I feeling? What was the context? Where did I have choice? Where did I not have choice? How did I feel then? How do I feel about it now? What would I change? What would I learn from that story? So there's a lot of inquiry there. We extract our values. We start to see a lot about how the things we lived, the moments that we lived, formed who we are today and the choices and the patterns that we embody today. We also start to notice what are stories that we have told over and over and how those have reinforced different aspects of our identity. Kind of like what you mentioned earlier when you're like, well, I'm the vulnerability podcast guy, right? So therefore, I have to make this choice every podcast to be as vulnerable as possible. And then there's the ones that we don't give voice to along the way and that are kind of operating subconsciously. So in our story work, we get to make sense of that too. And every time you make sense of something and you see something, you're given an opportunity to choose, well, do I want it still running the show in that way? Or do I want to make a shift? So lots of shifts can be made. And then from there, we get to become very intentional about how we craft our stories. For me, I largely work with people who desire to tell stories, to teach, to liberate, to inspire, to help others heal, right? So there's this like sort of service aspect to the storytelling. So then we become very intentional. What's my message? What are the values I'm embedding? What stories am I telling that show positive proof, right? Positive evidence so that my audience can believe it's possible for them. So for example, for me, I am a trauma survivor, and though I haven't like told you my trauma story here on this podcast, the stories I do often tell around my trauma are how I healed, and I show the audience that it's possible to go from somebody who went through trauma, couldn't get out of bed, and depended at one point on psychotropics to even just have enough serotonin to take a shower, but went through, layers of healing to where I am now, helping others and living such a joyful life by design, right?
Do you have any favorite transformations in clients?
That's a great question. I'm thinking of a client that I had very early on in this business who, when she came to me, she was so anxious to speak. She was an entrepreneur, but she was so anxious to put herself out there, but it would show up in other areas of her life, in her relationships, and in her current job that she had. And as we would work and we did somatic practices and we reframed, she really got to dig into accepting her neurodivergence, reframing a lot of the things that she had been made to feel like were shortcomings or even disabilities about her, but starting to see that they were superpowers and some of her most favorite aspects of herself. And as we went through the whole process, there was one moment where she was rejected from a job position, like a promotion that she had applied for. And she came to me, quite undone because she had such, that grief of rejection. And we recentered her into her story, reminded her the work that she'd already done to what does she really know about herself? What does she really have to offer? And then we prepared something for her to go and say to the same panel that had rejected her. She basically pitched a whole new proposal for a new role that would suit her and her gifts best. With, neither of us had really had, any guarantee that it would work. But she went and they gave her the role that she designed.
So she was rejected for a job that was advertised.
Yeah.
And then she just went back in and pitched them a new job.
It was given to somebody else. And she said, well, if you're not going to give me that job, what about this one? and
Wow.
I'll tell you exactly what I can do for you. And that was a result of our story work, because it was a result of excavating, this deep knowing, what are my gifts? Who am I? What do I have to offer? So she went in and they weren't even advertising. There's no indication that they could give out another role, but she was steady. She was rooted in her nervous system. She spoke from a place where I don't need you to validate me. I know this about myself, but I want to present this as an opportunity. She was given the role and a raise.
What are some, not necessarily examples, but give me a flavor. It's like some of the sort of like inverted commas avatars that you would work with. Like who tends to benefit most from this work?
I work with leaders. So currently I work with entrepreneurs, established business owners, or new business owners, or folks who are experts at what they do, like whether it's therapist, doctor, corporate, right? Like experts at what they do, to the point where they see that they have a body of knowledge and wisdom that they have to offer. And they come to me to sort it out. Many of them, despite being highly accomplished in their fields, still have blocks around self-promotion, right? And the idea of marketing themselves or knowing how to speak about themselves and their gifts, but they're passionate in helping people and offering what they have. And so in doing their story work, we're able to create the capacity, the somatic capacity within their bodies, that deep knowing to really just embody with clarity who you are. So it no longer feels like promotion is a gimmick that you have to like put on. It's just that you walk into the room and you speak with that deep knowing about who you are and the gifts you've been given and the lessons you've metabolized through all your life experiences, and amazing opportunities come from that. I mean, it's happened in my life and I get to witness it happen in my clients' lives. And then the other thing too is with my clients, many of them are drawn to this decolonizing piece. So they're wanting to get back in touch with their lineage, their culture. And I serve people of every background and race, but it's people who see this work as the channel for all of us to collectively build a better future together.
Yeah, that's cool. What do you think? What do you think this is the cost of not developing your story?
You live a life that you didn't dream of. You stay within the confines of dominant systems. And dominant systems, to be very clear, want us to stay small and flat so that they can utilize us as labor in the labor force, right? They want us to be disconnected from our imagination. They want us to be disconnected from our intuition. They want us to be only applied to our gifts in so much as it benefits the employer, right? So the cost of not doing your story work is you exist for the rest of your life in some capacity as a cog in the machine and never fully tapping into the life that your soul came to earth to have, like this great adventure and this opportunity to make your life the best art project you could possibly dream up.
Is there anything that you would like to add, a call to my audience before we close?
Yeah, I think that I want folks to know that this work is available for everyone. You asked who I work with, and I said leaders, but we all get to be leaders in our own spaces, in our own families, in our own communities, in our own workplaces. We all get to be artists in our own life. So this work is available to everyone, and it doesn't require going through like this deep, extensive training, right? Just start with some compassion and some curiosity, And then along the way, you'll probably be drawn to finding collective spaces, because that's the nature of story work, is that it draws us together. We get to make ourselves whole and then come together to share those whole versions of ourselves with each other.
Where should people go if they want to check out more of your work?
On Instagram, I'm at Dr. Joey Liu, and my website is www.drjoeyliu.com.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Love speaking with you, as you well know, and I really appreciate you sharing this for my audience, and I'm sure people can definitely learn some stuff that they didn't know before, and I encourage people to check out your work. All of this stuff will be in the show notes. So
thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Hey guys, it's me. Just a quick one before you get going. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Don't forget, you can check out links to my guests via the episode description below. And a reminder to claim your free VIP pass month at Indiip. Go to indiip.com/podcast. That's indiip.com/podcast. If you're looking to improve your life and build habits, I really think you're going to love this tool. All links are in the episode description. Thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.